know how well organized this is. It's not particularly rehearsed or scripted, and I'll just jump right in. I'm holding here two of the three books, the third being right back there, among others, of the original publication of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So, Player's Handbook, hooray! See the bookiness of it all, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. There. So, the Monster Manual being included in this batch, but again, not relevant here. So, looking at this, and without going into immense detail about their provenance as publications, which is bizarre, um, I need to acknowledge to you that this is not much of a role playing game. It could be, it would be, it might be, depending on just what you do when you roll up your sleeves and get into it, which I can attest to having done along with thousands of others, trying to figure out what on earth we are doing. Um, the origin of the different sections varies tremendously, whether they are frantic explanations that have had to be thrown together in the face of challenges or questions, um, whether they are responses to other games that have proliferated, whether they are both explicit and implicit, whether they are merely kind of a ranty or highly personalized notion of what we're supposed to be doing here, and then the question of whether that's actually what the person, Gary Gygax, was doing, who knows? The relationship to the tournament culture, the relationship to the hastily forming, not yet fully realized social network of the RPGA, many other things. People are basically making and publishing D&D stuff all the time, and TSR is in the position of either embrace it and suck it up, or deny it and lose this bank of people, who did this. Alarms and Excursions, the famous APA, Amateur Press Alliance zine, is extremely important here, I think. And there are parts of this that seem to have been created for earlier Dungeons and Dragons that then get ported in and hastily rewritten. There are whole sectors that are just coming completely out of left field, again, due to whatever authorship and origins. Anyway, I'm going on and on about this. I'm just letting you know. You pick up any one paragraph and it reads more or less rationally, and then you read, a bunch of other stuff that you're trying to hook together with it, and you just start wandering in circles really fast. That's not really what I'm here for, is just to mess with this, though. I'm giving you some context for what we're looking at and why I'm doing what I'm doing, which is to say, in many cases, the best thing to do with a great deal of effort thrown into something that someone has called a role playing game is to pull out your fire axe and go in looking for something that you like. And in this case, there are clumps of content which clearly would have been very well off, kind of given covers of their own and said, hey, look, this is a playable thing. Let's do this. And without having been shackled to this notion of traipsing around in stone corridors, wondering about coins, the book is almost aggrieved in the mismatch between doing that and the experience of being a fantasy reader. It's actually very heartbreaking to read this. So anyway, in I go with my fire axe, and there are a couple of things. In terms of pure game system coherence, if one were to take the bard from the appendices in the player's handbook and the ranger, and the druid, and say, okay, forget everything else. Forget it. Just forget everything else. Anything that pertains to the functionality of those character types we'll keep. Anything that doesn't, we're thrown out. And you will see that those particular classes have a remarkable relationship among hit points, levels, setting, implied setting, and a variety of mechanics that is extremely, extremely different from anything else in the game, and they all work together. Whether this is intentional or it all went in as a chunk and we see pieces of it scattered in places or not, probably not. Probably we're just looking at stuff that happened in play and stuff that people conceived of that do gel into something quite conceivably playable, enjoyable as such, without all of the hair pulling and teeth gnashing. The one that really hit me when I was 14 or 15 when this came out, and what immediately struck me as, well, this is the game, and we do have the rules to do it right here, right now. We've got the literature base, we've got all these useful starting points, we've got stuff to do. We could play this quite nicely. Now that doesn't mean we would have all sorts of, my criticisms of these basic rules would be absent, but they would be very, very, very solvable in the context of this tightly focused notion of what are we actually playing conceptually. So it's not the only solution, it's the one that jumped out at me at the time. So there are two categories to investigate, to examine this. One of them is the character class called Assassins. For those of you who don't know, character classes in this version of Dungeons and Dragons are classes and then subclasses. So you could play a fighter, which is the fighter class, or you could play the paladin or the ranger, and those are subsets of fighter. Now, this classification actually doesn't work like a Venn diagram, like I just said. It actually doesn't work that way. The paladin and the ranger follow their own class rules in full. So really, we're talking about three different classes, but the way they've set it up is this hierarchical kind of nested way. But anyway, I want to talk about the assassin class, which is listed as a subclass of thief. And the assassin class has many interesting features. I won't list them all. Unusually, almost all the character races are eligible to be assassins. If you didn't know, in this version of Dungeons and Dragons, the races are extremely focused in terms of which character classes they may be, and generally, a given class doesn't really have that many races piled into it as eligible. Some are more general than others, obviously, but assassin is quite interesting insofar as all the character races, except halflings, can be assassins. It's the most open of the character classes, I think, to any of the races. So that's kind of an interesting thing too. Right there, you're just like, huh, okay, and now assassin, anybody, practically anybody can wind up being an assassin. In terms of alignment, fraught topic that we will simply leave boiling in its pot, but point out that to play an assassin, your character must be evil, which in this particular construction means either lawful evil, neutral evil, or chaotic evil. Hands down. There are several different places, both in the player's handbook and in the DM guide. You can see what Gygax says that means, at least in terms of ideological description. Hang on to it, though. There's some interesting details about it. The poison rules, which are generally available. In other words, there are rules for using poison in the game. It is merely cited for assassins that they very habitually do so. And then there is also this interesting thing called the assassination table, which is a pretty basic table. I mean, it basically just runs your level against someone else's level, and it's 50%, for matched level, and a little bit up and a little bit down per difference. I mean, it's just basically a resistance table. And the idea being that if you catch somebody unawares, this is your chance simply to kill them. It's full of qualifiers. to the point where, you almost see somebody looking at that and going, oh no, no, that can't be, and then suddenly creating all of these qualifiers of, I mean, if there's a way for a DM to talk their way out of this, for yay or nay, anytime they want is all you can say. But the point is, there is this, insta kill table, assuming that your character is in a position of, I got the drop on him. Now, there's, as with some of the other classes, not the main ones, interestingly, not clerics, but with the bards, with the druids, and so on, but especially with the assassins, there is, and monks too. But there's this social structure to the leveling system that is extremely explicit, and basically it makes you look at this and say, oh, well, so we have a setting here, because you get up to a certain level, and then, well, guess what, only so many assassins can be in the next level, so guess what you got to do. So there's also interesting things about hiring them, and also about, well, hold on, interesting things about hiring other people if you're an assassin, and whether you can hire other assassins is quite strictured, quite clarified, and has its little steps. Somebody really cared about, well, if you're a fighter, you can just go off and hire a bunch of yahoos, and get, see if you can get any magic users in there or whatever. If you're an assassin, though, okay, what level are you? Who do you want? Okay, do you want any assassins in there? I mean, it's very, very carefully done. So there seems to be something about the leveling up of assassins, which is really, somebody said, well, okay, what about this? Okay, it has to be this way. And the same thing goes for followers. Assassins don't have followers like other people. There's interesting details there. Okay, as far as you being an assassin, strangely enough, uniquely for the game, we're actually finally talking about income for doing your freaking job, which is not found for any other character class. And now we have rates for, murder. Okay, kids game, awesome, keep going. We have also a very interesting section on spying, and specifically about spying as a function of being an assassin. These are character class things you do, and what you could be, called for, and how much you would get paid, and in disguise, which is otherwise not really particularly mentioned in the rules outside of magic, becomes a thing here, that you might disguise yourself in the process of spying, and what is this? So all of this is just implying, I mean, to spy, you have to have institutions. You have to have people, places, and things, someone wants spied upon. So that's another people, place, or thing about that one. And so all of a sudden, you've got all these components going on in order to be able to play this. So there's even more. There's a bunch of micro rules that just sort of crop up out of nowhere, regarding little pieces of this. For example, using poison. Okay, so if you're dungeoning around, and you're, and you've invested in some poison, and you, apply the rules for, its use, and maybe rules for whether good characters won't like it or not, or something like that. But the point is that, you can do it. We're going off in the dungeon. Oh, look, I got a poison blade. Okay. Here are the rules for that. Now, for assassins, there's all these micro rules. There's this thing about how if they draw a poisoned blade, what's the chance that an onlooker will spot it? And it's a big chance. I mean, it starts low, but they keep getting more chances, and it keeps going up, and that's for every single onlooker. And so the point is that any second now somebody's going to gasp, poison, right? And then you roll to see whether they attack you, or you roll to see whether there's a hue and cry for the watch. Okay, so all of a sudden we have a watch. And other things too. So that, like I said, there's these weird little micro, somebody's playing it out in their mind, how they would play this, or stuff like that, or how it should be played, and it seems to strike them, whoever's writing this, out of nowhere, and they're like, oh well, we better, and they make a little table. So it's full of these things. Finally, and really, this is such a rabbit hole, okay? In this version of Dungeons and Dragons, there is something called an alignment language. And it was raised in earlier writings. It was described first, I think, actually in here. And speaking of a hue and cry, the response among the culture of play and players was understandably confused, defiant, argumentative, negotiatory, um, and completely, again, to coin a word, chaotic. So the Dungeon Master's Guide gives us no help whatsoever. There's a great deal of attempts to explain alignment language, each of which walks itself into another wall. So what's interesting about this, though, for whatever you want to do with those damn things, or whatever they're supposed to be, whether they are merely nuances of body language and slang that accompany ordinary speech, or whether they are indeed a by the Chomsky, language, and why on earth, people would be able to speak them because they hold a particular ethical and moral position. Okay. Whatever you want to do with that. Assassins can speak their non-alignment languages. They can go and learn someone else's alignment language. Whoa. Okay. Talk about disguise. And whoa. So all of these things are just this huge little subset game of being an assassin. Okay, so what's the other aspect of the rules that I want to juxtapose with all this stuff about the assassins? Well, who else? I mean, it's not like I haven't shown my inability to avoid talking about them whenever possible, but we have the race of half-orcs. Talk about clearing away the fog of subsequent decades, though. When Dungeons and Dragons was published, there was no canonical orc. Most people know this now. Okay, fine, good. Go read Wikipedia. Do all that, please, because when Dungeons and Dragons came out, we know a bit about orcs, those of us who had read Tolkien, and there were no adaptations of Tolkien. The animated show wasn't even, the movie hadn't even come out yet. Or barely. The notion of what they were like was just hugely up in the air. The references that we had in mind actually include Maleficent's minions in Sleeping Beauty. Or if you read the books, The Lord of the Rings, and you think a moment, you will see where Gygax is coming from in his write-up, which actually is pretty rational based on what you would get from those books. First of all, they're foul, they're short, they are parodies of people in many ways, but there is no physical description of them particularly. We don't even get the idea whether they hunch about going, or whether they, just walk and talk like people. There's a particular sequence in The Lord of the Rings which implies actually the latter more than the former. Well, okay, what am I getting at? This whole concept of half-orcs, very much taken from some throwaway comments in The Lord of the Rings, and especially the final sequence set back in the Shire. Now, what do we find here? Okay, we find that half-orcs, as listed as a character race in the rule book, are within the human range of height, but shorter on the average. So in English units, just over 5 feet tall. They are unattractive. They get a +1 for strength and a +1 for constitution. Remember, that's on a random 3d6 roll or a couple of slightly more generous systems. But whatever it is, you get your scores, then you get +1 strength, +1 constitution, -2 charisma. The idea here is that they're also the one of the shortest lived. They have the shortest longevity of any of the races. The idea here is that, as it says in its inimitable fashion, they are, if you look on the racial reaction table, the best they get is that they can be tolerated by humans. Every other race has much worse responses to them, and to some extent vice versa. And they are so basically, and this is half orcs, not orcs, right? Half orcs are regarded in this very negative way, and the implication of the tolerance one is that, well, humans can sort of, put up with you on an individual basis, possibly. So here's your character. You're short, you're ugly, you're, you're marginalized, you're despised more commonly. And you also are hampered by very severe class and level restrictions. In this game, very few of the classes are unlimited in terms of level, except for humans. Wait, let me say that again. If you're human, any character class that you're in, you can just keep going up level. It's unlimited. There's no fixed number of levels that you would stop at for any character class. If you're anything else, almost every character class has level limits. You cannot get above a certain level. And that's it. So that's even in the classes that you're allowed in. The ones you're not allowed in, you just can't be. So these limits are fairly strict, actually, and the one that seems to be unlimited for most is Thief. Half-orcs are weird. First of all, they have very severe level limits in the classes that they're allowed to be. They are allowed to be, let's see, clerics, level capped at 4th, fighters, level capped at 10th, thieves, level capped at 6th, 7th, or 8th, depending on dexterity, and they're the only one that's capped for thief. I don't know why. Or assassins at no level cap at all. Oh. So maybe that's why there's a level cap for thief. Basically, if you're a half-orc who becomes, an 8th level thief, then your next step is to just keep going up in assassin, I suppose. Which we'll talk about in a second too, in terms of multi-classing. But this is quite interesting. If you want to go very crudely, basically, if you want to play your character indefinitely, like any sensible person, you're going to want your half-orc to be an assassin. Now the text, both for author to readers in a contextual way, and also just in terms of talking about the setting and what it's like, or whether how people interact with your character and what that is like, it's unequivocal. They're extremely racist. It's straightforwardly stated that half-orcs are not like, a population. These are the product of human-orc mating, and that human-orc mating is almost certainly not consensual. And it's kind of gross. Right there and then. But whatever you may want to come up with in regard to that to mitigate it or whatever, clearly you could at your table, should you so desire. That's me talking, not this text. And that, to keep going, is that it says, all right, to use their charming word, mongrel, of the mongrels thus produced, 10% can pass as human. Player characters are within that 10%. So we've got tons of half-orcs running around who basically are just considered orcs by everybody else. 10% of them can pass for human, which means your character is, did you hear me? Did I say that? I said it twice. passing for human. You do not say, "Hi there, I am Wally, the half-orc." No, you do not. Um, that's jarring. Is there anything like that for any of the other races in any way, shape, or form? No, there is not. Wow. Okay. I hope you're getting the idea here, right? You're short, you're ugly, you're best off being an assassin, which requires that you're evil. Um, and you are, in threat of your life for your ancestry to be recognized. Hmm. No, if you like adversity, you want to play a character who faces the adversity of their wretched little existence. I got my wrinkled little face and I got my little dagger here, and fuck you, man. Let's go. Right? This is your game. Um, to continue, the rules for multi-classing play into this remarkably well. Note that you can, if you are, therefore, a half orc, you could be, I guess you can make a little table, right? You got clerics, you got thieves, you got fighters, you got assassins. Multi-classing in this particular game is kind of haphazard. You kind of choose as you go up and decide whether you want to dip into another level and stuff like that. Or into another class, I mean. But while you're doing this, you're splitting your experience points between the two. Okay, this is sort of interesting because I'm looking at this and I see jumping straight out at me. Okay, the only one that's not capped is assassin. So come on, let's assassin plus X, assassin plus fighter, up to 10th level for fighter, and then after that you would just continue as assassin alone. Okay, that's kind of interesting because of the early levels of fighter are pretty robust characters in the game compared to the other classes. And one could easily see focusing on being a fighter with the heavy armor and stuff like that and staying alive until as such a time as you get to the point where your assassin abilities kick in a little bit better, in terms of your ability to succeed, of being able to, knock people off with your assassination table, a little more reliably, stuff like that. So you'd say, it'd be pretty cool to start off as a multi-class fighter assassin and work my way up. And at some point, either before or at 10th level, de-fighter, and kind of focus on just the assassin part. That's very practical, actually. Um, the same could apply for thief to some extent. Kind of interesting, and that you've got all the thiefly, guild stuff going on in that class as well. So that your assassin guild and your fighter, there's your assassin guild and your thief guild would, be blended in some fashion in the game, which would be kind of fun. Now, granted, it's a more fragile option, but that's thieves for you back then. And also assassins, even without that, they get thief abilities according to 2 levels lower. So if you're a 5th level assassin, you've got the abilities of a 3rd level thief. So it's, I suppose, if you wanted to kind of focus more on being a thief, and again, and have full thiefly abilities, as you level up, and then you would maybe, after hitting your limit with thief, then you would continue as an assassin, do a little dip a bit for your thiefly abilities, but proceed from there. Could be done. And in terms of potential setting, actually seems rather compelling. Okay, so that leaves us with assassin cleric. Oh golly. First of all, I don't know if you know all those cleric spells in there. especially at the early levels, first and second, third level. I don't know if you know that almost all of them are reversible for evil clerics. Cause light wounds, thank you very much, and similar things of that sort. Well, well, one says. That looks, no pun intended, potent, particularly because low level clerics are, if anything, more robust than fighters, or very close in this version of the game, and are, shockingly durable boogers. And the idea that your character is a cultist assassin who's fundamentally operating as a low level cleric as they develop their assassination skills, capping a cleric at fourth level, not much, right? Just enough to be a good solid cultist, basically. And then we proceed on to cult-centric assassination. Oh golly. Half-orc cleric assassins, different churches or cults with different spins on lawful evil, neutral evil, and chaotic evil. Potentially, the rest of society, what is that like that this is embedded in? Hashish? Okay, I added that part. But you see my point here, right? I think our fire axe got us somewhere.